All right, welcome to Close Call. Today we're with Nick Persico, our Director of Sales here at Close, and he's going to be talking to us about lead distribution. How do you bring your leads in from lead generation and assign them to specific reps on your team? How do you automate it? When do you automate it? How do you set it up? This is what we're going to be chatting about today. So thanks for joining us, Nick.
Happy to be here, Amy.
The first question I wanted to ask you is, when should a sales team think about automating lead distribution? Because, of course, when it's a small sales team, when it's just a founder, maybe this is done manually. When is it time to start thinking about automating this?
It's often the last thing because there are so many moving parts and things that happen before a lead needs to be assigned to somebody that is going to change so much. So when you try to set up automation for it and you want to make a change after that automation set up, you have to unwind that change and repurpose it. So I often tell founders or people that are building sales teams and they move from one sales rep to two and then three salespeople is you're probably best off doing it manually and a round robin to start or an honor system. If those two people can work well together and they can build a rapport between each other and diversify things 50-50. In an ideal world, I know it doesn't always work like that, but if you could do that, that's great too. Do all that first and then automate later once you've hit a scale to where manually assigning leads becomes some outsized part of your day in terms of your workload. Let's call it, for the sake of numbers, 15 to 20%. If 15 to 20% of your day is assigning leads, it's time to automate. But anything below that, you just do it manually because it's going to change so much as you learn new things on that whole sort of chain or process that's happening within your sales process.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And would you say this is more, when does it get to the point that you would need to do this? Is it because there's a lot of leads coming in, or is it just because when a sales team itself starts to grow?
There's two things. One, it is a effective thing to do to save everybody on your team's time
Hmm.
because time is the most valuable thing in any company, in any business. So anything you could do to reduce the amount of time doing some sort of repetitive task like this is great. So that's one, that's the obvious thing. Then two, there is this concept and this principle of building a sales team out and retaining great salespeople of having lead distribution being fair and transparent.
Hmm.
So as a salesperson, if I want to be number one on the leaderboard and I have that aspiration, or I want a fair shake at being number one on the leaderboard, I want to transparently and clearly understand what I need to do as a salesperson to make sure I'm receiving the leads that I'm entitled to at the right time. And that's usually a two-way street. The company needs to make it clear what those rules of the road are so the salesperson can understand that. And then two, the salesperson will have to do things on their end to ensure that they're in the appropriate place to receive that lead. The most common example of this is keeping your calendar open. So
Hmm.
if one way of getting leads is people automatically booking meetings on your calendar via, Calendly or Schedule Once or any of the many scheduling tools that are out there, and that's going onto a joint calendar that's giving those leads out based on availability or who's next in the line. If your calendar is not open and available, you're not going to get that shot. So that is the most common example of what the sales person needs to bring is that open and available calendar and not blocking it all the time. So yeah, that's the two main upside reasons for it is transparency and fairness around how I get a lead assigned to generate value for the company and for themselves via commission. And then two, the efficiency of saving time because it's a time intensive repetitive task that could be easily automated once it's clear what the process is.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's perfect. So now a sales team that's starting to grow, they're seeing a lot of leads coming in. They're ready to start some sort of automated lead distribution, or even teams that are still using manual distribution. There's various methods of doing each side, whether it's automated or manual. So I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, what are some of the lead distribution methods that you've seen or that you've personally used with your own sales team, and how did all those work? What have you seen?
Let me go from simple to advanced, right?
Okay.
So the most simple is a lead comes in. So this is either via a form, some service you subscribe to, many variations of things out there of a lead coming to you on the internet, right? The most simple thing and the place you should start first is have that lead, that information of that lead emailed to you or sent to you via Slack, which preferred method of communication that you want to receive that information. Have it come into there and then decide, use yourself as the logic person that's going to figure out who's going to get that lead and then assign the lead to that rep. And what's very easy is that you could just forward the email to the rep and say, okay, this is your lead. And then they could create it in the CRM or do whatever they need to do to get it in there. That's the most simple, most effective, and that's how you get started now. Then moving beyond that, you can, instead of sending that lead notification to your email, you can send it to a automation service. So the number one being Zapier, and then Integromat and all these other different plays of automating this type of data or information for one app to another. You could send that notification to Zapier, and then you could do a bunch of logic to it. There's built-in Zapier tools that you could use for this. There are actually products that do sort of lead distribution as a service that you can find out there. That's a growing ecosystem, and it's usually varied by how much money you want to spend, but also what CRM do you have and which CRM do they integrate with and all of that. So that's always going to be a nuanced, specific decision. So the world of 100 tools is probably going to be reduced to 5 or 10 tools for you based off of your needs, budget, and the CRM that you use. So you'll do that filtering on your own. And then that logic of who gets what lead will be in Zapier or in that tool that you subscribe to handle that distribution for you. And then once you have the lead information and the person that's assigned to them, then you get it into the CRM via that same automated process. So the logic often for who gets the lead is outside of the CRM. It's before it goes to the CRM. And that's the next step. And then a third is basically buying a software solution that sort of does all this for you. So obviously the price tag goes up, the complexity goes up, all those things go up, but they're covering way more of those moving parts in a single tool. That's sort of starter, intermediate, and then advanced. But none of these, fortunately, none of these require code or anything, or even a consultant really. The software has gotten good enough. And lead distribution is often pretty straightforward in terms of what you want, whether you want round robin, you want some weighted type of distribution where rep A is going to get 60% and rep 2 is going to get 40%. However you want to set that up, whatever the dynamics of your team are, they have these rules built in for you. So yeah, that's how I would think about it, as sort of that 3-step process of going from simple to most advanced.
Interesting. And just as a side point talking about this, I'm just curious, when it comes to these more advanced methods of lead distribution, what kind of teams would really need that kind of advanced distribution? When you're talking about getting a dedicated software for this or something like that, who's going to need that?
S- So it's often teams that have, call it 3 or more people,
Hmm.
because then you have a audience of salespeople that are going to require that in terms of fairness and their likelihood of staying to sell your product. Like, this is a feature
Mm.
that salespeople look for when they're joining a sales team. And everybody's talking about retention and talent right now. This is a key feature you need to have, being clear and explicit about how leads are routed, how, that all works, and how you could be in the best position to receive the most leads, or at least receive a fair amount of leads. So you need to have this in play. So 3 or more sales reps, you should definitely have some method or process in place that you can communicate to them. That's 1. 2, there is, when you're getting a high volume of leads and you need to automate that, because if you were to do it manually, it would take up all of your day or all of somebody's day.
Hmm.
This is a task that is repetitive, that could be automated. So that's the second reason why you would need something advanced. And then third, usually when you have a bigger team or your sales process becomes more complex, the amount of lead sources that you have also goes up, right? So to
Hmm.
use close as an example, we have 3 main sources of leads. One is people going into our product and starting a 14-day free trial, right? As most SaaS companies are this way. So when a 14-day free trial is created, we need to assign that to a salesperson if we deem it necessary that a person needs to be assigned to that lead. Second, we have people going to our website and filling out a form saying that they want to talk to us. Those need to be assigned to somebody. And then third, you just have people emailing our sales@close.com or info@close.com, and those need to be handled. What's funny is that 1 and 2 of that, the 14-day free trial and filling out the form on our website, those are automated. But
Hmm.
people emailing us, sales@close.com or info@close.com or support, because that email is widely out there, those are handled manually because I don't get 30 of those a day. We get a handful of those a day. So we develop a process internally for us to handle these manually because they're very nuanced, contextual. Somebody that maybe already had an account or had a previous relationship with the salesperson is probably emailing us. So that needs to get to them. So to automate that seems more trouble than good. So we don't
Yeah.
automate that one. So that's a good example of how what a team would need for setting something like this up.
Interesting. Nice. So let's dig a little bit more then into this, how it's set up currently at close, the lead distribution. Obviously, right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we have three people, three account
Correct.
executives on the sales team. So how are leads getting distributed between the team?
So currently we are doing this really homemade Zapier slash code solution.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is that we are very lucky that here at Close internally, we have non-engineering resources here. So people on the sales team, people on the support team that are technically proficient. So we
Hmm.
are in a position to where we can build logic through code. And that's often where we go. And that's just a unique, attribute of Close. I don't feel
Hmm.
like this is true for everybody, but we have that attribute. So let's use it. Let's utilize that. Let's leverage that. And it's always a lot of fun to build these with folks like that. That's why we have it. It's not because we think that there's software out there that doesn't work. That's not the case at all. It's just this works better for us. So we go that route. So basically what happens is that for all leads that are automated that come in that need to be assigned to somebody in an automated fashion, the lead comes in to a app that we built. This is a very simple Python app that we built. And basically it says, okay, we have this lead and this information. Let's go out into the internet to these different company information databases. This is often called enrichment.
Hmm.
We go out to hit one of those services that we pay for, say, hey, this person's email address or this person or this company, let's get some information about it. How much money did they raise? How many employees do they have? Basic things like that. So let's get that. So that gets appended to the lead information. And then we say, okay, now we need, based off that information, we need to make a determination if this lead should warrant a human to spend time reaching out to them.
Hmm.
And I wish we could talk to everybody, but we can't, right? So in very broad terms, if you're one person and you're a one person company, you have the benefit of subscribing to a subscription of Close that is $20 USD per month, roughly. So the economics of this is similar to a Netflix subscription.
Hmm.
So when you go and subscribe to Netflix, a salesperson doesn't call you and say, hey, I'm a salesperson from Netflix. Let me tell you about all these different titles that we have and how great it's going to be. No, you're sold through the organic self-service marketing machine that they've made. And we
Hmm.
do the same thing, right? So if you're a one person team, you're going to come through that funnel and we're going to orient things to be self-service, but also so inexpensive that it makes economic sense for you to purchase that product. So this app tries to guess, and remember, it's not right all the time. It never is. Tries to guess if it's one person that should go through the self-service channel, or it is a larger company that's going to have more needs. There's more nuance. They need a salesperson to come in. Then we will say, okay, we need to assign it. And then the logic of who is next in the order, we do a very simple round robin. So it's just whoever's next up. We don't do anything more sophisticated than that. Whoever's next up gets assigned the lead. And then that package of information, that container of information, we then send it into Close, our CRM. And because it's set up this way, we could go into the app that we built and tweak the logic very easily. We could say this attribute from the enrichment service, we want it to actually only qualify a lead if it's X, Y, or Z. We want to change the order for a little bit because maybe a salesperson is going to go on vacation for a week, so
Hmm.
we don't want to assign them leads because they're not going to answer any of the calls or the emails that come in. So let's do that. So there's all these constant tweaks and changes that we're making on that side, but the overall container that goes to the CRM doesn't change. And that's what's great because if you have to do all that in the CRM, you're going to cause a bunch of downstream issues and a lot of complexity there. So by keeping the logic separate, it gives us this flexibility to really make decisions on the fly or make adjustments. So that's how it's set up at Close.
That's really interesting. That's so cool. So this is definitely a unique system then that maybe other companies, other sales teams wouldn't have because they might be more inclined to use a software that's already built rather than trying to create their own little Python app.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest here, Amy. We built this 4 years ago. And 3, 4 years ago, the only SaaS software that we were aware of that did this
Hmm.
specific thing was very expensive, more of an enterprise type thing. So therefore, we just felt like it didn't make sense for us.
Hmm.
Now, if this Python app was going to get shut down, if it was being ripped from my hands tomorrow, now I have the benefit of there has been many products and services that have been built for small or growing startup teams like us. So I would have all the confidence in the world if it got ripped away from me tomorrow that I could go buy software off the shelf and be completely happy and be fine. And we may do that very soon because
Hmm.
as we grow our own level of sophistication and our own needs, that crossroads is going to come where well, maybe we don't really need to code this and spend time on this. Let's not reinvent the wheel. And I think we'll make that decision very soon. So that's just some additional context there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So teams that are looking to do this and sales leaders that are looking to start this now actually have an advantage because now the software to do this is available even for smaller teams and startups.
Yep. And it's very competitively priced. Like
Hmm.
it's fairly priced for the value that it gives out. And you could decide that I want the Cadillac and I'm going to pay that Cadillac price, or you can buy sort of the basic economy prices, get by with what you need based on your budget. So the market has grown and
Hmm.
matured so much that you could pick which level of service and features that you want, and you'll be happy.
Awesome. That makes sense.
One thing you may want to insert in there that people don't naturally think of is scheduling tools like Calendly, and
Hmm.
there's many others. They have started to have built-in distributed logic for how to distribute meetings to a group of people. So in
Hmm.
Calendly, for example, you can create a group calendar. So in this context, it would be a group of your salespeople, and you could tell Calendly how you want the distribution of meetings to be assigned. And one could be optimized for availability. So you don't care about the order so much. You just want to make sure as many open slots are available to get a meeting with somebody. Or you can optimize for fair distribution. And optimizing for fair distribution means is that you may reduce the amount of availability overall, but you're going to have it be more fair of who gets the lead assigned to that. And you could choose between those two, and there's your logic there. So by somebody going and booking a meeting on your Calendly link, it's going to show the availability, capture all the information, the person's email, the name, phone number, what you need to create the lead. But then it's also going to assign it to a person and then send the meeting invite to both people. So if you think about it, Calendly and these scheduling tools actually cover a high percentage of this whole lead distribution process. So that's something that I think goes overlooked. And you could really cover a lot of that from there. And just with the simple Zapier integration, or some of these tools integrate with other CRMs directly or close for that matter, you can set up all the logic in there. The meeting is booked, and then you can easily add that lead to the CRM and have assignment handled at that point too. So that's a really good, easy setup that you could do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for some sales teams, if they're already using a scheduling tool, they might already have the tool that
Yep.
they need to automate this.
Yeah. 9 times out of 10. Yep.
That's awesome. So once a sales leader starts using lead distribution, once they've chosen their method, maybe they're automating, they've chosen their software, they're figuring it all out. How can they tell? What would they measure to see if this method is really working for their team? Like, how can they tell, for example, that it's fairly distributing these leads across the whole team?
So at a very high level, you look at what's going in. So how many leads were assigned to a salesperson in a given month or quarter. And then you take into account, was the availability of the salesperson there the whole time? So did they take a vacation during the quarter? Did they not? It's not anything the salesperson did wrong. It's just facts of
Mhm.
their available working days in that period of time. Did that match up to the other people? So you look at what's going in, and then you look at what's coming out. So basically closed business, right? Won opportunities. And you often have to take a snapshot in the past to let the sales process play out, depending on how long your sales cycle is. So here at Close, ours is roughly 30 days because we have a 14-day free trial. So usually people close or don't close within that 14-day window, or there's maybe 2 weeks of time after that where maybe it takes us a little bit more time to close the deal or, what have you. Like there's a little bit of
Hmm.
buffer room in there. So if I want to see the answer to your question that you gave me, I got to look at all the leads that were assigned 60 days ago and say, okay, this was assigned 60 days ago. What was the net result? So salesperson A, they got 100 leads, they closed 25 of them. Salesperson B, they got 100 leads, they closed 30 of them. And then I look at the difference there. So that's where you start.
Hmm.
Then as you dig deeper into the moving parts in that process of leads in, leads assigned to money out, you look at predictive indicators of a good outcome within that system. So lead get assigned, how many of them did they get in touch with? That's a big
Hmm.
one. And a good practical measurement for that is how many meetings did they have? First meetings did they have? So
Yeah.
out of the 100 leads that they get, look in the CRM and say, okay, out of those 100 leads that are assigned to them, how many did they actually have a meeting with? And that's a really big drop off that you need to be aware of and making sure is working, because this is often something where the salesperson doesn't have an effective follow up process. So maybe they send the initial email or make the initial call, but then nothing happens after that.
Hmm.
So if they get 100 leads and they only had a meeting with 20 of them, that's bad. You should try to have a meeting with at least 50 of them. And if the salesperson can't get a meeting with half of them, then you got to look at their performance, obviously. But then also, to be fair, you got to look at the lead quality, right? So this particular metric informs you on many directions that you could go, but that
Hmm.
leads to fixing the parts of that funnel that need to be fixed. And there's always something that could be improved on and fixed, right?
Of course.
So that's a very specific example. But moving beyond from that, it's sort of, okay, they get the meeting. All right, well, how many of those get opportunities created? How many are we in the deal room for? And then the outcome of the closes from that. And that's just natural close rate and all that type of stuff, because you get down further into the sales process. But yeah, that's what I would look at, and making sure that the lead amounts are even and all of that can really be great indicators of where your team ranks in terms of most efficient or most effective performers versus not. So you could develop this KPI within your team that's transparent to your salespeople that know how you calculate it to measure performance. And one example of this is your lead assigned to close ratio, right? So you could create a metric like that. And whoever's number one on that is usually the most effective, because if I give them 10 leads and they close 6 and the next people close 4 or 3 or whatever, oh, that person does the most with the lead that we assigned to them. And then you could reward them with some sort of weighted distribution, if you want to get that complex, that will give them more leads than the others. And if the others want to earn that benefit, their ratio needs to go up. So you can create
Hmm.
that competition, that leaderboard that isn't solely based off of money brought in, because money brought in, while it's great and you shouldn't ignore it, but it's to me, it's not often the best predictor of a salesperson's effectiveness when you're talking about inbound leads coming in, because if one salesperson is up in the order and they get the $1 million lead, and that lead is so different from the other leads that come in, maybe those are 1 in 100, and that salesperson got 2 of them in a quarter,
Hmm.
and they closed 1 of them, of course their numbers are going to be at the top because they got the best lead. And that's not anything they did wrong. So while you look at that and you reward people for that, and you want to make sure that they close those big ones that they get, you can't make it a black or white descriptor of their effort. To me, I think it's better to look at a more sophisticated ratio of, if you get 100 leads, this is your output of those 100 leads. And that number is going to determine who's number one on the leaderboard, or somebody that you reward the most with, who's going to get the most leads next quarter.
I like that. That makes sense because I feel like too, when you do a weighted system that's based solely on money, on the numbers that are coming in, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it would create the tendency on a sales team to focus only on the leads that they feel are going to bring in the most money and kind of forget about the other ones.
Exactly. And when you're in a SaaS business, especially in the lower end of the market, not lower in terms of quality, but in terms of deal size,
Hmm.
the way that all of us, the SaaS industry, really grows their businesses over time is the compounding interest of subscription revenue. If you close a huge deal and it starts out as a huge deal, that's great. That's fantastic. Nobody should complain about that. But what really is key is, can you close a lot of medium-sized, high-quality deals that some percentage of them are going to grow to those big deals over time? So you're exactly right. It's a vanity metric, and you
Hmm.
should try to avoid it if you can, and more focus on the ratio and the effectiveness of a salesperson's work of when they receive a lead, what comes out of that and how consistent is that? I care about that more than the big shiny numbers at the end of the day.
Nice. That's awesome. That makes sense. So then I want to open up and get some of your best practices, your suggestions. I'd love to pick your brain here and see what are just some of the top tips that you have for SaaS and startup sales leaders who are they want to start automating or they want to start improving their lead distribution process. What are some things that you would tell them?
Well, the first thing is document it. Document what the process is.
Hmm.
So you and your fellow salespeople can scrutinize it and work together to come up with something that is ultimately very good and fair.
Hmm.
Because I think one of the big reasons why a lot of salespeople leave bigger organizations is that it is an opaque process of how they get a lead assigned to them. Either
Hmm.
because it's opaque by design, because that's just the way the organization is built. I strongly disagree with that, but that's just the reality of how some of these older legacy businesses are, for lack of a better word. Or two, they can't describe how it works, so therefore it's opaque, right? It's become so out of their control
Yeah.
that it's a magic box that we can't figure out. And often that happens with complexity, right? Is you
Hmm.
lose control of it very quickly, especially when there's a lot of moving parts. So the first and my biggest tip is document it, be rigorous about your updating the documentation, and use that as a feature to acquire and retain great salespeople, because they're going to appreciate that. They feel like they're getting a fair shake. They're going to do all the things you expect them to do and ultimately be happy in the role in the company that they work for. That's the first big tip. Next is something we talked about, which is don't automate for the sake of automating.
Hmm.
Automate when you have a very clear set of repetitive tasks coming in every single day, to where it's mindless when the task comes in. So if you get, let's say, 20 leads in a day and it's very mindless, you look at the lead, okay, who's next up on the list? And then you assign it to that person. If you see yourself, your eyes glazing over and doing that, then that is pretty easy to translate into a automated system, whether it's a drag and drop Zapier like thing, or you're using some sort of off the shelf software to where you can describe what process that you want to the software and it can handle it. So that's the next one, is automate last. Once 20% of your time is in handling this, that's when you should automate it. And third, like all feedback and advice that we give here at Close on a multitude of topics, keep it simple. Like, simple is often, easier. I can describe, like I did earlier, I could describe our very complex lead assignment process in 2 or 3 sentences, and try to stay to that, because anybody that we're trying to recruit to the sales team or trying to give experience and advice to folks like we're doing on this call right now, if I can't describe it that quickly, then you got a problem.
Hmm.
And that's when it starts to get out of control. So keep it simple at first, and then build onto that as you go through time. And if you followed the first step of it's documented and it's out there and it's transparent, and you have great salespeople, they're going to tell you when something is unfair or needs to be tweaked or what have you. And then you make a decision on a case by case basis. And I think with those three, pieces of the framework, you should be good to go.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for all of these tips and for keeping us informed about lead distribution. Thanks for joining us today.
You got it, Amy. Cheers.